good evening. Welcome to the Results Grassroots Conference call for February. For anybody for whom this is their first time, I'm Aaron Oxley, the Executive Director of Results UK, and I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting this evening. I hope by the end of it, you'll have learned something interesting or heard something that inspires you, and you'll be understanding why the campaign action we're asking people to take this month is going to help us bring about our mission of ending global poverty and inequality. But first, all of the usual housekeeping messages. We're recording this call and we're going to post the recording on our website for anyone who's missed it to watch later. So please feel free to turn your video off if you'd rather not be in the recording. Along with the recording, we also share all of the links that are shared during the call. And we use automatic captions, which you can turn on or off using the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of the screen if you want to follow along with some words. It does a reasonable job, but not perfect. Please do keep yourself muted during the call. And if you've got a question or comment, go ahead and use the chat box. We'll try to respond to you there in the first instance. If you're new, please feel free to introduce yourself, either by turning on your microphone and saying hello, or by using the chat box. It'd be great to hear where you're calling from, but it's also okay not to introduce yourself if you prefer not to. Anybody want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Evening, Peter. I know you're not new.
I'm new every day, darling.
I see a hand up. Himani.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Himani. This is my very first meeting with Results. I'm currently doing my master's at the University of Manchester in governance and public policy. And when I read about Results UK, and I thought that my ideas and my perspective really align with Results, and that's when I thought that I would really like to volunteer. And I'm really excited to be here. So I just wanted to pop in and say hi to everybody.
Thanks, Imani. Welcome. You're very welcome. And hi, Kush, down in London, probably not too far from where I am, also in London. Welcome along. Anybody else new want to say hi, or should we jump straight into it?
Hi, I'm Ellie. This is my first time as well, jumping on a call. Nice to meet everyone. I'm also based in London. I am currently just finishing up a role at the National Lottery Community Fund, and I'll be starting a master's also in social innovation shortly. But in a previous life, so for about 8-9 years, I used to be a biomedical researcher. So actually the topic of today I'm quite familiar with. I was in infectious diseases in a lab setting, but bacteriology rather than viruses.
Wow, that's amazing, Ellie. Well, hopefully we can teach you something new tonight, and maybe you can teach us. That'd be wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Last call for any other new folks wanting to say hi. Okay, very good. Welcome to everyone. Let's jump into the meat of the call. As normal, I'm going to start with an update on what's happening in the world of international development and how it affects our work. And I also want to share some of the work that the Results staff have been doing this month, which we hope complements the work that you've all been doing all around the country and helps inform what we ask all of you guys to do advocacy on each month. And as you know, we only ever ask you to take action if we genuinely believe it has a good chance of having real influence on the behavior of the government. And as always, we are incredibly grateful for the way you choose to ally yourself with Results on the issues that we work on and the power of you using your voices to make positive changes in the world. Now, as most of you know, a lot of our work at Results is focused on global health, because health is one of the things that everyone has a right to. And without good health and good nutrition, you can't access other rights, such as the right to pursue economic opportunities or the right to education. And of course, the COVID pandemic has really just thrown to the fore the need for strong health systems, and a crucial part of that is equitable access to safe, effective vaccinations for existing and new diseases. Just over 2 weeks ago, we were really pleased to have helped secure a debate on exactly this topic in Parliament, where MPs from all political parties spoke in favour of a more joined up approach to ensuring that everyone has access to vaccines. Now, that included routine immunisation for children, speeding up dose donations for COVID vaccines to low and middle income countries from excess doses here in the UK, and also whether the intellectual property rights to vaccines should be temporarily waived. This is known as the TRIPS waiver, and it allows more countries to be able to manufacture vaccines to fight the pandemic, and we believe they should. We'll put a link to this blog, to a blog about this debate in the chat box, which also there has a link to the recording of the debate itself in Parliament, so you can see what the MPs themselves were actually saying. Supporting that debate was quite a bit of work. We supported the all-party parliamentary group on global vaccinations. We briefed MPs, so on, lots of stuff around that. And several results staff were involved in that behind the scenes, along with other allies such as the People's Vaccine Alliance, UNICEF UK, the One Campaign, and many others. But if you were able to invite your MP to go along at very short notice, a very big thank you to you. Another event we were pleased to have played a part in was a parliamentary exchange last week organised by the International Parliamentary Network on Education, or IPNED. And because International Parliamentary Network on Education is quite a mouthful, I'm going to just call it IPNED throughout the rest of the call tonight. Now, IPNED works with parliamentarians in 55 countries, all advocating for improved access to education and improved educational outcomes for children typically not reached by quality education services. Working with IPNED and with our colleagues in Results in Canada, we convened over 50 parliamentarians from around the world to consider the urgent action necessary to address the global learning crisis. Despite big rises in the number of children attending school over the past 2 decades, millions of children around the world are still failing to learn even the basic skills of reading and writing, and this has been made far worse by the COVID crisis. We expect to ask you to take action in support of this advocacy later in 2022, and this kind of political collaboration between countries is going to be critical if this learning poverty is going to be addressed. We're going to share a link in the chat with a summary of this event and why learning poverty is an issue in need of politicians' attention and action too. Now next, you may have seen a new digital and social media campaign called We the Helpers. This has been produced by the Aid Alliance. It's a coalition of international development organizations, and Results is affiliated but not a core partner in the campaign. The aim of the campaign is to rebuild trust in international development among people who have become skeptical that we're making a difference. We think this is really important work to do. However, we do have significant concerns around the language and imagery used in this particular campaign, suggesting that we in the UK are the helpers and the recipients of aid are waiting around for us to help improve their situation for them. This plays dangerously into the trope of white saviorism, which all too easily reinforces rather than challenges the damage and ongoing impact of British colonialism and frankly, the racist power structures that exist in our world. We weren't asked for our views before this video was put together, and notably, we understand that the views of people and organizations in the countries depicted were not involved in the creation of the campaign. Results is actively trying to change the way we as a sector depict people in countries that receive UK aid or official development assistance, as it's properly called. And this is an active conversation that's going on right now. We're going to put a link to the We Are the Helpers video in the chat box, and we'd love to hear what you think about it. It's important that we have a constructive and respectful dialogue, as these issues are sensitive and quite controversial, but we think we all need to get better at challenging paternalistic narratives like this, even when it's well-intentioned and is trying to meet people where they are. I also want to say a little bit about malnutrition. Many of us were deeply disappointed in December by our government's failure to pledge financial resources at the Nutrition for Growth Summit in Japan. This was particularly bitter because the UK had shown such strong global leadership on nutrition since 2013, when the Cameron government started the Nutrition for Growth agenda. I think some of you have also taken action since December as well. We mentioned on last month's call that it was not too late to have influence, even though the summit had finished. We don't know the details yet, but we now believe that the UK government will announce its financial contribution. Whether it's as much as we would like, we will see, but our initial intel suggests we might be disappointed. But that said, getting any announcement is critical, and with some of the budget processes complete, we hope that'll be very soon. Now, this matters for many reasons, but I'd like to remind you of something that we mentioned last month. Nutrition is absolutely critical to the government's own ending preventable deaths and health system strengthening strategies, and they won't be able to reach their targets on those without a serious pledge on nutrition. As soon as they make an announcement, we'll let you know, and hopefully you can see some of the results of all your considerable efforts taking effect on this really important topic. And lastly, I also just want to remind you once more about World TB Day, World Tuberculosis Day, which is coming up on the 24th of March. I know this is a fixture for many of you who have been campaigning for better TB treatments for many, many years. But for those of you who don't know, TB was the world's deadliest infectious disease until COVID came along. TB kills around 1.5 million people every year and makes many millions more terribly, debilitatingly ill. This year, with the fight against TB put back by around 12 years by the pandemic, it's vital that we pick up the pace once more. So our March and April campaigns will be on the topic of TB. If you want to plan ahead for March and April, you'll find some basic information on TB and the Global Fund Replenishment, which is how we're going to get some more money going to it, on background sheet 2 and the information you were emailed on Friday. It also includes information on how the various multilateral health funds that we advocate for all work together and why we've been campaigning on them all at different times. If you're new to these, it can seem a bit bewildering, and we're going to be introducing you to yet another one of these this evening. So now, before we hear about the subject of this month's advocacy, it's time for my favorite part of the call, which is to hear about your actions around the UK over the last month. So I'm going to hand over to Ruthie for the Grassroots update.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as you can probably gather, there's a lot going on in results, and with your advocacy, you've sort of been juggling quite a few of you replying about nutrition, sending letters on polio, and now on to our new actions. So just a big thank you and well done, as usual, for all the actions you've been taken. You have taken would be the grammatical correction of that sentence. I should put the disclaimer that this is not as refined a roundup as I would usually do, because I have my COVID booster today. So I had half the day out of the office. So yeah, talking about COVID vaccines later on in the call will feel very appropriate. But just wanted to pick up on what Aaron said about World TB Day. So if you think ahead and perhaps consider doing an additional activity of some description, we did put some activity ideas on the background sheet. Just wanted to say that, again, as usual, feel free to get in touch with us if you need any support at all or want to bounce ideas off us. You know, myself, Naveed and Tanya, our new campaigns coordinator, will be very happy to support with that. And whilst we're on the topic of TB, I'm going to hand over to Kathy actually for quite an exciting update. She's been working very hard specifically on some TB advocacy in Edinburgh. So Kathy, if you are there, yeah, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Ruthie. Well, I've just been checking, and as of just this evening, I think we've got about 26 MSPs that have signed the motion that a Conservative MSP presented to the laid down in the Scottish Parliament. It's a variation on the one that we did 2 years ago, where we were going to get a debate in Parliament just before COVID struck. But I'll just read the motion that the Conservative MSP actually said, that the Parliament notes that the 24th of March marks World Tuberculosis Day, understands that tuberculosis remains one of the world's deadliest infectious diseases, killing 1.5 million people each year, believes that the COVID pandemic has reversed decades of positive progress in tackling TB, understands that there has been uneven progress in the delivery of the commitments made at the UN high-level meeting on TB, including efforts to diagnose and treat 40 million people with TB by 2022, and to dramatically increase investments in research. Considers that TB is a disease of poverty, with the most vulnerable and marginalized at greatest risk of both TB and drug-resistant TB, including in Scotland, believes that strong international health systems are vital for securing the UK's domestic health security, recognises what it sees as the importance of the upcoming 7th replenishment of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria in tackling global TB, and notes what it sees as the vital work carried out by clinical staff, scientists and civil society organisations across Scotland and globally to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goal of ending TB by 2030. So actually, I think for a Tory MSP to present that is quite an achievement in itself. And the fact that we've got most of the MSPs that are in the Conservative Party have already signed it. And we have now, it's according to the website, it's now achieved cross-party support, which means that it will be eligible to be considered for a debate, which is very exciting. I know that for people who've been involved in this, in results for a while, we've been here before and it didn't happen, but I'm very optimistic. And at the same time, we've definitely got an exhibition which has been sitting in my box room for the last 2 years, ready to be put up in the MSP's part of the Parliament. So it's sort of 12 information posters around the subject. And so we will be getting that set up for the week of the World TB Day. So even if we don't get the debate, we'll definitely have a chance to interact with MSPs, and hopefully what they will do is shame their counterparts in London to discuss TB as well. So thank you anyway, and let's keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you, Kathy. That is a real achievement, and I think we're all waiting. Hopefully you can join in March or April even. Yeah, and give us an update. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing how that goes, and just what an achievement. The wording of the motion as well includes so many different aspects of advocacy on TB. So yeah, something we'll all be watching closely, so well done. And I'm going to just move on to a few other updates. I'll keep them short and sweet. We've got 2 guest speakers this evening, which is very exciting. So just a big thank you and well done on everyone who took the polio action in January. We've seen quite a few letters that you've been sending, including some handwritten ones from the Cheshire group, who, yeah, we hope that all your personalised lovely letters, well, they're not lovely because they're talking about a really serious issue, but Karen in particular and Tyra, I think the Cheshire group chose colourful paper to try and add some hope and cheerfulness to quite a serious issue that we're really hoping the government will make an announcement for in support of the fight to end polio. So as well as that, there's been a few replies coming back from the government on letters that you've sent previously last year in our campaign about the TRIPS waiver. So that's the intellectual property, the IP waiver. I'm forgetting acronyms. We can put a link in the chat for reference. And the replies we've seen state quite strongly that the UK government is not in support of the waiver, and that other ways of sharing knowledge is their preferred way to go down. So that's been interesting to see it worded in the way that you've had it worded in your replies. It's different to wording that we've seen elsewhere. But as I mentioned, the debate that happened earlier this year on vaccines included discussion around the IP waiver. And it's clear that there is some pressure within Westminster on this issue, as well as you and campaigners. So again, linking all the different routes to decision makers, hopefully will be a powerful combination. And there's an opportunity coming up to bring advocacy sort of in Westminster and campaigners together in a lobby day. It's going to be the first lobby day we've had, I think, in probably over 2 years now. And it's organised by our friends at the One Campaign. So we have mentioned this on previous calls and in emails, but the date is now confirmed, having changed a few times. So just to confirm, it's on the 23rd of February, and it'll be a chance to invite your MP along to discuss issues of vaccine equity in the COVID-19 pandemic, and a few other things. I won't list them all now, but if you're interested at all in getting more information, please do email us and we can get that over to you. And finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone who filled out our survey and attended the focus groups we held. This was part of a grassroots review that we're doing at the moment, so looking at how we could improve our support to you and what other kind of things we could be doing in our campaigns. And there was a lot of really rich information that we're going through. Yeah, we'll definitely be taking it on board, and it'll feed into any future kind of changes we might make. So thank you. And if you didn't get a chance to, or something else has popped into your mind, we're always open to feedback or suggestions or ideas or comments. So again, just send us an email, or I would say give us a call, but we're not in the office, but we can arrange a call to chat. So that is everything from me. So I'll hand back to Aaron and we'll be moving on to the topic of the call today, which will be very interesting. So back to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Ruthie. So now to introduce the topic of this evening's conversation, which is about access to vaccinations, in particular, the development of new vaccines to fight either existing or future infectious disease threats. If only some of the people on the planet have access to these vaccines, but most don't, then that's just not good enough. Not only is this an issue of basic justice, it's also true that you can't fight global health risks without taking a global approach to vaccination development. And that's what we're going to be hearing more about from our wonderful guest speakers. We've got two of them this month, double trouble. I'm really excited to be able to introduce both of them to you now. First of all, I'd love to introduce Sally Girgis-Hjoberg, who's a Senior Investor Relations Manager at CEPI. That's the Center for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Quite a mouthful, but CEPI is much easier to remember. Sally, a very warm welcome. And secondly, it's my pleasure to introduce an old friend of Results, Laurianne Robinson, who's the Director of the Advocacy Team and who's leading the coordination of UK civil society advocacy on CEPI's Replenishment, which is what we're talking about tonight. Lovely welcome to you both.
Thanks very much, Aaron. It's really wonderful to be here. Lovely to meet everyone on the call.
Likewise, very nice to be on the call. I think this is my second call with Results activists. So they're always fun, always a challenge, and I'm looking forward to this evening.
We're so glad to have you back, Laurianne. Big welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us. So let me start by letting you know who we've got on this call. You've heard a bit of what everybody's been up to so far, but the rest of the highlights package is that, you're joining our grassroots volunteer campaigners from right around the UK, people who regularly take advocacy actions, mostly aimed at the UK government, to try and persuade them to meet their international development obligations and fund the kind of programs that will make the most difference to people that are living with poverty and injustice. We have people on the call who've been working on these issues for many, many years, but we also have people joining us tonight who are brand new to international development and global health. So I think it's fair to say that CEPI is new to many of us on this call. So I hope you've done your reading ahead of time. We hope to learn a lot about what it is and what's needed from it, given the challenges we face in the development of vaccines for epidemics and pandemics. Now, Sally and Laurianne, we've got two pre-prepared questions for each of you, but before we go to those, I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody every month, which is, can you explain just briefly what got you into your area of work, and what is it about your work that fires you up and makes you want to come in to the office or the spare room or the lounge every morning? Sally, why don't you go first?
Thanks very much, Aaron. I love this question. I wasn't quite sure how to answer it. I mean, I think the thing to say is that I am originally Australian, but I spent quite a long time living in the UK working at the British Medical Association. And I think it was at that point that I understood that two of the biggest kind of gains in modern medicine were around maternal and newborn health, but also that vaccines were sort of lifesavers across the globe, and particularly for low and middle income countries. After living in the UK, I lived in Egypt for 10 years, and I got involved in the international development sector, and I really loved that doing something that actually felt like it was making a difference for 10 years, and then moved to Norway. And Norway was one of the founders of CEPI. And it is a very complicated name. It stands for the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. But I was really struck by the fact that the organization was set up after a huge crisis. The Ebola crisis in West Africa really showed the world, I think, that, sometimes if there wasn't a market for vaccines, that, there were terrible consequences, health and economic consequences, and really devastating impact on the globe. And I love the fact that CEPI was trying a new model of collaboration with all elements, I guess, of the value chain, in vaccine development to try and move things forward. So that was exciting, and it was an interesting job potentially in Oslo. I'm calling in from Oslo this evening, and the thing I'd say about CEPI is it's full of incredibly dedicated experts and people who are could be working anywhere, but they've decided to work at CEPI because of what we do around access. Actually, everybody's very, very mission driven. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sally. Now, Lorianne, you've answered this question once before. Can you answer it again and make it more exciting the second time?
For sure. I'll also start at the beginning and say that I was a lost cause as a young person, where I had, like many people, I'm sure, the only thing that I was interested or focused on trying to do in terms of thinking about a career was thinking about something that I thought could make a positive difference. That was the only thing. I very nearly applied to be a prison officer at one point. Because I thought that sounds like a career that that could help people, and I moved in and worked for many years in the policy space, working at a national level in the UK for Barnardo's and the NSPCC, and then transitioned to work on international development issues. For a number of years, I was head of UK advocacy at the One campaign, and then having done and worked on a lot of campaigns, I used to joke that I felt like I'd gained my MBA in advocacy. I'd learned a lot of tools and a lot of tricks, and I thought, well, perhaps I can help other organizations to execute and to run their campaigns. And that is what has brought me to CEPI in a very much in a consultancy role, and many organizations will contract me and my team, the advocacy team, when they are sometimes at a crunch point with their campaigns and they feel like they need some extra help, they need some external help and external support, and we do our best to support them. And so I've been working with Sally and the team, who are all working incredibly hard. What she won't say is Sally is looking after not only the UK but 4 other countries, and that number's reduced since I joined. And so we're thinking about influencing governments all over the world. And it's a crunch time for the campaign and a crunch moment, but everyone's working really hard, and I'm also doing what I can to try to support the campaign.
Thanks, Lorianne. That's great. So thanks both of you for sharing those things. Always great to get a little bit of a personal story from folks. We're going to go straight into the questions. If you want to text in a question because you can't get one into the chat box tonight, it's 0777 56 11178. That's 0777 56 11178. Put additional questions in the chat box at any time. If you want to direct them to somebody, do say who you'd like to tackle it. But we're going to go to Sally for our first question, and it's going to come from Swansea. Do we have Swansea on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, Sally.
Hi.
Yeah, the question is what is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and how does it work?
Thanks very much for the question. So, and I have to say, I opened up your very excellent action sheets, and I think that they're really a good description of what CEPI does. So CEPI was founded in 2017, as I mentioned sort of earlier on, as a coalition between governments and academia, the private sector, civil society, really everybody that's involved in vaccine development, and that includes philanthropies and obviously regulators. And the idea behind the organization is to accelerate the development of vaccines against emerging infectious diseases. So not any vaccines, but vaccines that are particularly likely to cause epidemics and, as we've seen, pandemics. The way that we work is we have selected viruses that the World Health Organization has outlined as of particular risk, especially in low resource settings. And we get funding from different governments and a couple of the big philanthropies to direct investments in the science. So we're investing in what we think the best candidates for vaccine development are. And before the COVID pandemic, these viruses, I can list them. There were Lassa fever in West Africa, chikungunya, Rift Valley fever, MERS, which is the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, and we were able to pivot some of our investments actually in the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome toward COVID-19 when the pandemic hit. So the idea is that CEPI looks at where investments are not being made, where there is high risk of great damage in low and middle income countries, and does and invests research, accelerating research and development toward the production of a vaccine. And I want to say, the other thing I want to say is that in our portfolio from the very beginning was this disease X. So the World Health Organization has always recognized the potential for an unknown pathogen and unknown pathogens, I would say, to hit at any time. And I think this last year has really shown us, that the COVID pandemic is such a disease X. Essentially, it is a family of viruses. It's one of it's the coronavirus family that has hit the world, as we all know. So we work on these sort of neglected tropical diseases, as well as trying to take a best guess at the next disease X. So we are coming to the end of our first 5-year period, and we have some very clear plans for what we want to do in the next 5 years. And we've been learning, I would say, from this pandemic and from CEPI's response to the pandemic. And the fact that there are 3 vaccines that are appropriate for use in low and middle income settings, and that 1 billion doses have been delivered through Covax, which is an instrument of the world, for the world, but designed and stood up by CEPI together with Gavi and WHO to really make sure that no one is left behind in this pandemic. So I hope I've kind of given you a bit of an overview. I'm not using a presentation, but I certainly have materials that I'm willing to share and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ellie. We're going to go straight and give you another one of those from Paul this time.
Hello, Sally. It's Helen here from Paul. Are you muted? No, I've just done it. We've seen there's been a problem with equitable access to COVID vaccines. How could we prevent this in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And I don't think the answer is simple, but what I do remember is in January 2020, waking up and looking at my inbox at about the 5th of January, and our CEO, Richard Hatchett, said that he, thought that this was a real problem. So well before the World Health Organization had declared this a pandemic of international concern, or an epidemic of international concern, i.e. a pandemic, he was highlighting that it was really important for CEPI to get in early and to work with our vaccine developers, but bake into the contracts commitments to equitable access. So, there are a few things that I think CEPI does, and that it has at the heart of its mission. What we do is we don't take on, we do take on candidates. So that is vaccine developers, that are working on vaccines that are suitable for low and middle income settings, so low resource settings. So we're not in the business of investing in vaccines that have, for example, a -70-degree cold chain where you need kind of super industrial freezers to transport such vaccine to to the people. What CEPI does is we invest in vaccine candidates that are using technology that are appropriate for low and middle income settings. So it's partly about I think the investments, and it's also about trying to bake in as much as possible access commitments into our agreements. With the advent of Covax, which I mentioned earlier, so it is the vaccine pillar of Act A, which you may or may not have heard of, but there is unprecedented cooperation, I would say, across global health organizations in this pandemic to try and make sure that the world has access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. So the Covax pillar is the vaccine element of Act A. And what we do is we bake in, as I mentioned, access commitments to Covax. So we are saying that although we are working kind of far upstream of a vaccine going into somebody's arm, what we're doing is encouraging vaccine developers to make available vaccines should they come to fruition. Because a lot of vaccines fail actually in the product development cycle. There is a high rate of failure, and it's we call it a probability of success that we use to estimate which vaccines will go through. But for all of the candidates that are in our portfolio, we ask that there is a commitment to supplying doses to Covax, which is, that globally agreed facility, infrastructure to deliver vaccines to the globe, particularly in low and middle income settings. And it is a huge milestone, and I think 1 billion doses have been delivered. And I have the numbers here on. I'm just trying to figure out the number of countries, but perhaps I can come back to you with that because I didn't. Here it is. I'm sorry, 144 countries. So we've had 1 billion doses delivered to 144 countries.
Massive numbers, very impressive. Sally, thanks so much for that. Great answer. I'm going to keep us moving along so we've got time for opening up the questions to the broader floor. Lorianne, we're going to go over to you next, and the question for you is coming from the Stort Valley.
Hi, I'm Jill. The question is, what advocacy is needed now to help CEPI achieve its mission in the next few years? What's needed now?
Thanks so much for the question, Jill. So the very big thing in front of us that both Sally and I and many others are working very hard towards is CEPI's replenishment. So on the 7th to the 8th of March, just over a month from now, the UK government will host a replenishment conference for CEPI, and that will be a moment where, leaders from around the world will come together, and they will, we hope many of them will make a financial commitment to finance CEPI's work over the next 5 years. We are trying to raise £3.5 billion, which set against the cost of pandemic recovery, both economic and in health terms, but also in terms of the impact of the pandemic on other diseases, we think is a very modest ambition. And within with the goal for that financing is to fund CEPI's 5-year plan over the next 5 years, including what we call a moonshot mission, which is try to get the response to the next pandemic within 100 days, to be able to go from kind of development to being able to roll out a vaccine within 100 days, far faster than we were able to do in response to COVID-19. So we have this big goal of 3.5 billion. We have this moment where leaders will come together in London. There are question marks all over the world as to what governments will pledge, because as you know, this is a difficult moment economically for many countries. There are many demands that have been made of governments. And so the work and the partnership of our partners in civil society, in philanthropy, in the private sector is just so important. CEPI is a really small team of people. It's a tiny team with a big mission, and support from the partnership in also making the case to governments about the value of investment in CEPI, the value of thinking that little bit further downstream, and making investments that will put us in a much better position to respond to epidemics in future is incredibly important. And of course, particularly with CEPI, because it is a new organization, because it does not enjoy the sort of name recognition as more established multilateral health organizations, I think more support in helping us to be more visible to governments, for people, for Parliament. We don't necessarily enjoy the same visibility among parliamentarians as other organizations who've just been working and doing this for longer. So more support so that governments are hearing from their parliamentarians in their countries to understand that CEPI is important to politicians, that CEPI is important to the public, that CEPI is important to scientists, etc. The more of that kind of positive noise and support would be hugely welcome as we're in the home stretch towards replenishment.
Oriane, thanks for that. Moving along from one end of the island to the other, we're going to go all the way up to Edinburgh for question number 4.
I think there was a last-minute change of plan. We're going to go back to the other side of the country, halfway to Cheshire.
Hello there, it's Karen from the Cheshire group. You had me stumped there for a minute, Aaron. Okay, is it realistic that the UK government will contribute funding given the cuts to the aid budget?
Yes, great question, Karen. I would say yes, it is realistic, and I would say that for a few reasons. One is that the UK has traditionally been a global health superpower. As we used to say, the UK has always been a country that steps forward and has been willing to make kind of positive investments to support global health, and to see that kind of enlightened self-interest, that investment in making sure in global health is good for the UK and it's good for people around the world. And so traditionally the UK is one of the highest donors to global health. And we see the evidence of that in that the UK has stepped forward and has agreed to host the replenishment, and we know that they are putting a lot of political effort into trying to encourage other countries to step forward. They really want to see this replenishment and this event in March, in next month, to be a success, and I've no doubt about that. There is another particular reason why I think the UK will really benefit from CEPI, in that in many regions there are emerging and sometimes established regional bodies and institutions who are looking regionally at pandemic preparedness. And our latest situation vis-a-vis the European Union means that we don't enjoy equal access. So actually the UK stands to benefit particularly from CEPI. But I'd also just want to say something about the cuts to the aid budget and what that could mean. The overall goal is 3.5 billion. The ask of the UK is far more modest. It is 300 million, is what many campaigners have been asking for, including us on the CEPI side. That is a very modest contribution in comparison to many other both global health and non-global health campaigns that the UK contributes to. But crucially, because of what I said about the enlightened self-interest part, this is not this is a piece of funding where we are asking the UK to contribute, yes, partly from the aid budget, but to really, really think beyond the aid budget. And there are many countries, including Germany and others, where their contributions to CEPI partly comes from their aid budget, but also comes from their health budgets, because of course, investment in vaccine research and development is a benefit to the country, to everyone, and it's a benefit to their health funds. And so we are asking the UK, yes, to make this contribution. We recognise that, of course, some of it will come from the UK's development budget, but to think beyond that. And we've been particularly targeting government departments outside of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, thinking specifically about the Department of Health and Social Care and the Department of Business and even beyond. So, and I guess the final thing I would say is we have all seen in a very visceral and a very powerful way what it costs when we are not, when the countries are not, and the world is not prepared for a pandemic, and we see it in the bill, both in terms of social security and the response to initiatives like the furlough and support for businesses, and in the human costs and beyond. And so we think asking governments around the world to make a modest contribution to put the world in a much better place to respond to upcoming and emerging epidemics is actually just really, really smart investment.
Thanks, Lorianne. Seems pretty clear to us, which is why we put it on the dance card for tonight. Really, incredible value for money. You know, you think about how much the UK has spent responding to COVID so far, and imagine the difference that we would have had should vaccines have been ready even earlier than they were, and the world been even more prepared. That's exactly what CEPI is all about, and why we're really excited to be working on it tonight. We're going to go open to questions for everybody. We've got about 15 minutes, which is good. We should get some good questions out there. There've been a couple in the chat, but before I go to those, does anybody want to unmute themselves and yell one out, or shall I go to the chat?
Aaron, do you mind if I just quickly jump in?
Go ahead, Richard. Make sure you introduce yourself. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks both for a really interesting talk. Yeah, it's really interesting to sort of learn about the organisation and its sort of its plan when it comes to vaccine deployment globally. A question for Sally. You mentioned earlier on in your talk about sort of encouraging big pharma companies to get involved in the in the CEPI project, and obviously they're a key pillar in reducing vaccine deployment to 100 days. How does that sort of conversation take place, and sort of what are their biggest hesitancies to sort of progressing on this issue? Because obviously, the huge sort of costs they incur for doing the R&D and things like that when they push out any sort of new product, especially when it may not work at all. Obviously, it's probably one of those barriers to overcome. So how does that sort of conversation take place? And yeah, I'd just be interested to learn more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things, thanks very much for that question, Richard, and it's a really good one. I think the thing to say is that actually a lot of the partners that CEPI has had to date have been sort of smaller biotechs and academia in terms of the pharmaceutical. Do you know what I mean? Not like your sort of like huge sort of big pharma, but a lot of the early stage and breakthrough research is often done by these kind of smaller entities. The thing is, most of the work that CEPI does, especially on the WHO blueprint diseases, is where a market doesn't exist. So the big pharma is not actually interested in, developing a vaccine for Lassa or for MERS, and often that's because the small outbreaks are over, or they're not, financially viable for the large pharmaceutical companies to make these investments. And that's where we think CEPI does make a very big and tangible difference, for low and and middle income countries. And of course, you know, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, actually CEPI's investment was with the University of Oxford, to be honest, because that is where, you know, CEPI saw the potential and a gap in the market, so to speak, in terms of bridging, you know, the finance and helping bring that vaccine, you know, forward, that then was picked up by AstraZeneca. So CEPI's role, as I say, is more about filling the gap in the market, you know, where there is not a financial incentive for pharmaceutical companies to go in and develop these vaccines.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm going to go over to Peter's question from the chat, and to save you scrolling all the way back up, I'll read it out. Peter is asking about infection rates in Africa for COVID, and how are they relatively low compared to more wealthy nations, and about vaccination rates in Africa as well. In the sense that many of us have been watching the news, haven't seen some of the challenges unfolding in Africa that we thought we might have. And yet we still have very, very low vaccination rates there. So I guess the question Peter asks is, what does this mean for the urgency of global vaccine availability?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good and important question. And I think that there's a lot of things that are tied up in there. And clearly in low resource settings, there are, you know, the ability to kind of, you know, test and trace and, you know, have surveillance, you know, around, and I'm not an epidemiologist, I have to say, I'm a political scientist. So you know, but my observation and in from what, as I understand from listening to the epidemiologists, is that, you know, health systems are naturally much kind of not as strong, obviously, in low resource settings. And so it's entirely possible that, you know, we don't have an accurate picture of what the disease is like in terms of the infection rates is what I would suggest. And I also think that in a way, the principle is the same. I mean, you know, the idea is that if, especially with this, you know, particular kind of pandemic, is if COVID is anywhere, it's going to be kind of everywhere. And the fact that there may not be the same level of information around vaccination rates or a strong health system in low resource settings is not a reason that people shouldn't have access to vaccines. And that's entirely the purpose that Covax was sort of built on, is that, you know, it's absolutely vital that everyone, you know, across the globe does have access to vaccines. And we are seeing this year being the game changer, I think, in terms of availability of supply of vaccines, you know, and 3 of the CEPI funded vaccines, Novavax, AZ and Clover, are making their way through Covax to be delivered out to the world, including in low resource settings.
Can I just add to my question just very briefly? It seems to me that the actual diagnostics in South Africa are pretty good. So my question still stands, because it does seem that infection rates in South Africa are lower and the immunization rates are lower. So how does this add to the urgency of CEPI's campaign in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of global campaign in Africa, and I think that you're absolutely right that it was South African scientists that identified the Omicron variant, and you know, I think what the scientists say is that, you know, the type of virus that this is will just continue to circulate until there is, you know, a reasonable level of sort of vaccination rates continue to circulate and mutate until there is, you know, high levels of vaccination.
Let's go to Lorianne. I see your hands up.
Thanks, Rose. I just to say 2 things, add 2 things in addition to that question. I mean, we were in a position for a long time in 2021, especially, whereby frontline health workers in some countries with vaccination in some low-income countries had barely touched 5%, had barely touched, you know, had not moved past 10%, and where when people were in Europe were receiving their 2nd and 3rd doses, including healthy people who without underlying health conditions and who did not necessarily pose any high risks, people like me, for example, were being offered 3 doses before people that we know epidemiologically are the most vulnerable to serious and underlying health conditions everywhere, were able to access those, and that is at the heart of the vaccine equity, of the call for vaccine equity, and that was the consequences of the choices that governments made in terms of the way vaccines were shared. So I know CEPI's approach is not specific to Africa, and it isn't necessarily even specific to COVID. It's about looking for those emerging epidemics. Some of those have been in Africa, some in the Middle East, and in other places. But I think that's the approach that we want to take, and that puts equity at the heart. And in terms of how has this pandemic affected countries differently, it may be that it's too early to tell because of all those reasons that Sally highlighted about differences in the way that variances in testing and tracking and monitoring, etc.
Thanks, Lorianne. Hopefully a slightly easier question. Let's go to Jill. Do you want to ask your question, Jill? I know you're good at unmuting very quickly.
Just meandering around the CEPI website, just seeing what it was about and all the rest of it. And I looked at the board members, and there's Charlotte Watts, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor and Director of Research and Evidence Division at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And she's on the board. I'm just wondering what the relationship is between that and the fact that she's on the board, because we've had other people that have been on the board of organisations like Gavi, and they've had influence. Does that make sense? Is there a relationship there? Is this something we could exploit?
So Charlotte is on the CEPI board. You're absolutely right, and I can talk a little bit about CEPI governance if that would be useful. I mean, there is, what we call an investors council that we have in CEPI. So where countries and philanthropies invest in CEPI, they sort of, meet. It's a different structure to what they have in Gavi, but they meet regularly and they hear about what's happening on the portfolio. So they have some oversight, if you like, of where the money is going, visibility on progress of the portfolio. And you can basically, there are 3 investors that sit on CEPI's board, and at the moment the UK is in the form of Charlotte Watts is elected to CEPI's board as an investor representative, though she obviously clearly has incredible kind of scientific and technical knowledge that she brings to bear in terms of the strategic decision making of CEPI that's made by the board.
In other words, the UK has not just a financial stake, given the money that we've previously given to support CEPI. We've actually invested in the governance and have a say in how it actually works, which I think is really important for us all to remember, particularly given our current Foreign Secretary's strategies around bilateralism over multilateralism and the words that she's been using around those phrases. I think it is important to remember, particularly as the UK is hosting the conference and the UK is on the board, the UK has a serious say at an appropriate level over what CEPI is actually all about. We are rapidly running out of time. We only have 3 minutes left. Ricky, I think your question's been answered in the chat already. I'm hesitant to unpack either TRIPS or vaccine hesitancy in the last 3 minutes, but we'll give it a go, and we'll go for 60-second rapid fire answers, one from Lorianne, one from Sally. You get one of them each. So Sally, we'll give you one of the hard ones. So CEPI has some access policies around, being able to get the outputs of the research that you do actually out there in the world. So can you talk a little bit about the conditions that you include in your contracts for around the investment when you're doing that work that can help guarantee equitable access to the tools that are developed with your support, and how you hold yourself and your partners accountable to that? And then I'll also ask Lorianne her question to give you a second to think, Sally. Lorianne, your question, I'm going to give you Kate's one. Does CEPI envisage any issues with its 100 days mission, given a lot of vaccine hesitancy was rooted in the speed of the COVID-19 vaccine development and the fears that it had not had adequate time to be robustly tested? So let's go back to Sally for the first question, and then Lorianne, you'll get that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And just to say that we do make early small investments, and we require commitment to CEPI's equitable access policy, and that is the path to further investment. So put simply, we are not going to make further larger investments with an entity if they don't commit to these principles. It is a relationship. So it may be that the company doesn't want to sort of work with CEPI, so they've got to be brought into it as well. These are, these are operators, that have an opportunity to not work with us. But if they're going to work with us, they will be committed to the principle of equitable access. And I can share some material that we have on the web which explains how we do that in our contracts without giving anything away about the contracts themselves, which is obviously quite difficult. I'll post that in the chat.
Thanks, Sally. Much appreciated. Now, Lorianne, vaccine hesitancy and speed of vaccine development.
Yes, I think there are a few things to say on that. I mean, one is that, as Sally outlined at the top, so much of the investments that we make in vaccines are building on knowledge that have been acquired from what we've learned from developing other vaccines and that connection between MERS and COVID, etc. And while we have this 100-day mission, of course, it is our hope that it is not needed in the next 5 years, that there isn't a global pandemic, and this is about being ready should the need arise. But I think the really important point is, and there is recognition of this within CEPI, is that this cannot be just a conversation among scientists and academics, that we have to think about the rollout. We have to involve the SALIs, the social scientists and the anthropologists, and we have to involve people and communities, because you can develop a vaccine, but if you don't take seriously to understanding the kind of underlying and structural issues that affect things like take-up, and even questions like the relationship between systemic racism and vaccine hesitancy, then there will be limitations to where vaccines can reach. And so I think there is definitely a growing awareness within CEPI that that the coalition has to be bigger than scientists. It has to be broader, and that these issues have to be a part of how the strategy and the approach is developed.
Lorianne, thank you. We are 1 minute past. That is a lovely way to end the call in terms of building a bigger coalition. We're glad to be a part of it tonight. I want to thank both of you so much for answering these questions. Hopefully that's helped set the scene for the CEPI replenishment, and also shows why the campaign action we're asking all of you grassroots to take this month, and really how you can make a lot of difference in equitable access to vaccines over the next few years. There are not going to be that many people writing to the Secretary of State on this issue. Your letters are really going to land. They're really going to matter. So please do write them. I think they are probably some of the most powerful and important letters that we're going to get out. Time is relatively short. It's on the 8th of March. But as we've been saying for a couple of months now, lots is up in the air with the UK aid budget. The budgets are all over the place, and the decisions are still open. So make sure you do get those in. Thank you for all your smart questions. Thank you, Lorianne. Thank you, Sally. Give you a wave goodbye. I am going to close the call there. Goodbye to everybody. We look forward to seeing you again the next Grassroots conference call. That's going to be on Tuesday, the 1st of March, precisely 4 weeks from today. Have yourselves a lovely February and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thanks for everything you do.